service workers at a number of large New York City residential projects. One of them, in fact, is across the street from where we are now at 66 Rockwell, have alleged that they did not receive wages guaranteed them under what's known as the city's 421A tax abatement incentive. Around 600 workers are affected by the program, which grants building owners significant tax exemptions in exchange for providing affordable housing, prevailing wages, and benefits for the building service staffs.
That's right. In the context of Mayor de Blasio's overall target of increasing affordable housing by 200,000 units, pretty large and very ambitious target, why is a program that affects only 600 people so important? To talk about this, we want to welcome back New York State Assemblyman Walter Mosley, who represents Brooklyn's 57th district, which includes neighborhoods stretching from Fort Greene to parts of Bed-Stuy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
And Rob Hill, the vice president of 32BJ, with 145,000 members, the nation's largest union of property service workers, which is in turn an affiliate of the Service Employees International Union, with a membership of more than 2 million.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Strong.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
All right, Assemblyman, give us a working definition of 421A.
Please.
Like, you might see it when you're going to buy an apartment or something. Oh, it's a tax abatement.
Right.
And they tell you right from the beginning, this is a reason to buy here. But what is it?
Well, it was a piece of legislation that was created back in the early 1970s, I believe 1971, by the state legislators who, you know, at that time, New York City was a much different place. You know, we were on the verge of bankruptcy.
Right.
The city's fiscal standing was not where it is today. So the state, which was in the business of creating affordable housing and affordable housing opportunities for New Yorkers, felt that in order to stimulate that we needed to give developers at that particular time an incentive to want to build affordable housing, not only for market rate housing, but for those who could not afford market rate at the time. Yeah. So as a result, the bill passed in the 70s. It was eventually amended to include the prevailing wage component, because we felt that if we're going to have a city built by working class men and women, we need to make sure that they're being paid a wage that would allow for them to be able to live in this city.
So that prevailing wage and that working wage thing is something that is really a rallying cry now, but how long ago was that included? So if the thing started in the early 70s, when did we get smart to putting in the wage
Subsequently,
obviously, 2006, I think.
2006,
so as
very
far
recent.
as like 30 years later.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we understood as state legislators, obviously I wasn't a member of the body then, but clearly, you know, the reason why we created that component of building affordable housing was to make sure that middle class and those who are maybe lower middle class and those who want to get to the middle class needed an opportunity to have decent, affordable housing to raise their families. And so that was the crux of this amendment, and actually the crux of the genesis of this bill.
Right, right. So basically what we want to make sure is that the folks who are working in those buildings, the doormen, the porters, et cetera, have a living wage, which is what, $22?
About $22 an hour, which is about $42,000 a year with health care and a retirement,
Which is actually not
barely
that
enough
much.
to get by in New York City with a family.
Right, right. But it is an important element, and yet we're talking about so few people. We're talking about 600 workers. So why do you think this is an important
Well,
thing
first, it's a program that's continuing, and you got a situation like you mentioned across the street where apartments are being rented for a two-bedroom for almost $5,000 a month, a one-bedroom for over $3,000, and not having to pay taxes on the condition that you would provide a few good jobs and some affordable housing, and then the developer, Doorman company, is refusing to do that, and that's the case with buildings all around the city. There's other buildings, for example, on the High Line, condo, a one-bedroom that sells for $1.5 million, and the worker, Manuel Matos, who works there, has to live with his family in a one-bedroom because he's being paid $12 an hour or $8 an hour instead of the agreement. And so the city has foregone $1.1 billion in taxes on the condition that you provide some good jobs and some affordable housing, and these developers are not doing it.
And most of the time that's known as like the 80-20 rule, right? Or split. They do 80% market rate housing with a separate cutaway for 20% of affordable housing. Maybe even with a separate door sometimes.
Well, that's unfortunately, hopefully an isolated occurrence that the city will rectify. But let me get back to why this is important. Because what we're seeing throughout the city, and Bob can probably attest to this as well, is that a lot of developers are using whatever revenues that they have left over to buy out tenants in an effort to accelerate what we see as gentrification that's taking place throughout our city, not just here in Brooklyn. So instead of using the tax abatements and the revenues generated from it to pay the prevailing wages, we're seeing a lot of landlords using it as buyouts so that individuals can leave their homes prematurely, and then taking those apartments, particularly the older ones that are, the turn of the century buildings in central Brooklyn, where there's huge ceilings and large bedrooms, and splitting them up and making a 1-bedroom into a 2-bedroom, a 2-bedroom into a 3-bedroom. And as a result, not only are there a violation of Department of Building standards and the text in the actual the physical wellness of the building, but they're also skirting city laws and state laws, which allows them again to profit on the backs of working class men and women who are paying taxes, who are actually allowing them to build here with some form of tax abatement.
So that begs the question: who is maintaining accountability for the tax code? What's with the incentives?
So the tax abatements, as I understand it, are approved by the Department of Finance, but it's HPD that, unfortunately, the last administration was not enforcing the law, and we think that they will enforce it. But you mentioned that this isn't a lot of workers, but the mayor ran on a tale of two cities. Here's one law in the books that begins to address some good jobs, some affordable housing, and we need HPD to enforce it.
Rob, do you know how many buildings in Brooklyn are under 421A now?
I believe it's about 60 to 90 buildings total in the city. I'm not sure how many are Brooklyn, although a lot of the new development has been right here in downtown Brooklyn.
I know I read a figure that said if Jamie and I pooled our money together and we bought $1 million lot, there it is, we bought $1 million lot and we put up a project that made the value worth $10 million. The way that the 421 abatement works is that we'd still pay taxes on the lot's original $1 million value for the next 20 years. So looking at that, saying that $10 million worth of taxes won't come to the city for 20 years, who is benefiting besides Jamie and I if we build that building?
Well, I'll tell you who's not benefiting. It's people who have lived here all their lives, people who have raised their families here, who would like to have their children live here. Those are the people. I wouldn't say there were more people benefiting. I think there are people who are not benefiting from this practice that is somewhat pervasive throughout the city of New York, not just here in central Brooklyn, where we see it. We see a heightened level of it because of the proximity to Manhattan, its proximity to viable transportation, and to colleges and universities. But I think more people don't benefit from this practice, and more people are harmed by this practice than there are people who actually benefit.
So, I mean, when we're talking about, when we kind of look at the priority of different things, because we have, education that we're worried about, we have transportation, and we have jobs, and we have affordable housing. So would you sort of put affordable housing there on the front line and everything sort of a domino effect after that? And if so, and kind of explain that.
I mean, I certainly would put good jobs and affordable housing and improving as a key to improve our communities and address the sort of the tale of two cities. And as part of our union, we're supporting the fight for 15 with fast food workers. We're organizing airport workers. There's a much bigger problem to address in terms of turning service jobs into good jobs. But here's a set of jobs that are on the books that that people were given a tax abatement with the promise that they would provide good jobs who are not doing it, where it needs to be enforced.
So you and your organization, you guys make the difference in elections. You show up to vote and you help people get into office. Is 421A something you would like to see go away? If it's been around since the 70s and your people aren't seeing the benefits of it, is that something you're ready to put your voting power behind to say,
no, I think what we'd like to see is HPD enforce the law. I think a law that someone gets a tax abatement to help provide good jobs where some people can help support their families, that's going to begin to address some of the affordable housing problem, is a good law, but we just have to enforce it. So to give out the tax abatements and then not enforce the law is really the problem.
Right.
And we're looking for HPD and working with community groups and to help get the law enforced.
And one thing that we're doing, working with HPD and working with organized labor, is to make sure that whatever the law may be going forward, that it is equitable and it's fair. Clearly, like I said before, in the 1970s, this is a much different city than we are today. So do we need to amend 421A as we go forward? Certainly. You know, I think it sunsets at the end of next year.
Okay.
We'll be looking at making some revisions as we go along. I know I sit on the housing committee, and I'm sure I'll be sitting for Bob and his constituent base talking about this initiative. But I also want to say how this ties into the much larger scope of the predatory equity that we're seeing throughout the city. Doorman is one of a multitude of landlords that own swaths of property throughout the city. They will take out a mortgage, a blanket mortgage, where they'll own 30 to 20 buildings. We're talking about large tenement buildings, which are, for the most part, 90% of them are get their revenue from rent-stabilized apartments. And as a result, what we're seeing is in this practice of abuse of the 421A tax abatement is that they're using whatever revenues to buy people out, which could be used to pay prevailing wages to the people that they're obligated to pay based upon the law. So, you know, we're seeing this. There's a connection between the two. I know we want to try to prioritize, but they're all you know, they have their own importance, and they're all connected to one another. Because if you don't have prevailing wages, how can you afford, you know, affordable housing? If you don't have affordable housing, how can you live in the city that you know, that you've called home and that you want to live in and prosper in? So, you know, we understand that, you know, there is a pecking order, but we also understand that everything is integrated and interconnected to one another.
So who's going to be made an example of if we have these bad actors who are taking our money and using it instead of to pay people a fair wage and maintain housing, they're using it to buy people out and flip their apartments to market rate? Who's the bad guy that we should be throwing tomatoes at?
Well, Dermot developer is one right across the street from here, but anybody who agreed to take a tax abatement and not pay and agreed on the condition to pay their workers a living wage and provide affordable housing, who's not doing it, HPD should force them to give that money back to the city and back to the taxpayer. And we're going to continue to rally and protest until that happens.
And I'll add to that, there has been one bad actor that it's legal aid has brought to a settlement.
Okay.
Pinnacle, which is a bad actor along with BCB. They have this predatory equity practice that's pervasive, and we've come to a settlement which they're going to be paying for legal services. There are several thousand people who are eligible who live in the Pinnacle building, but only 300 have registered. Right. We'll be having a meeting, a large town hall meeting for those residents who live in Pinnacle buildings on August 28th. If they would like to find out more, they can call my office at 718-596-0100. And even if you don't live in the Pinnacle building, if you live in the Doorman building, you live in the BCB building, or if you're just experiencing what we're seeing, you know, which is systemic, please come to this meeting, because legal aid and other good actors want to help rectify this situation as well.
August 28th.
August 28th, okay.
So if you write your rent check to any of those people, you might want to get down there and see what's happening.
Yeah. So do you feel like we're at the stage of just raising awareness of this, or do you feel like we're further along in the accountability of things?
I think we're raising awareness. I think we've had buildings where workers are standing up, realizing their rights, realizing they're supposed to be paid more money. And when those workers stand up and fight, we've been able to win the pay that they deserve. But we've also found it's a big problem, and a lot of people are skirting the law, and we need a bigger campaign to force everybody into compliance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do the workers go? Who do the workers go if they feel like they're being treated unfairly, or they know they're not making the money
Yeah,
that
if you're
they're
a porter
supposed
and you're
to?
making $8 and
The 32BJ. Enlist you in the fight to raise your wages and
That's
get you
who
what
I
you deserve.
Okay, because I'm just thinking about, I live in a building with a porter and a doorman, and I just think about how much they're part of my experience of living in that building, and how much work they do, really, truly. I mean, anytime there's any trouble going to them, so.
Well, it'd be interesting. One of the Doorman buildings where the employees are actually, you know, picketing and protesting, you know, and they want their prevailing, and they want to organize, most importantly, that the residents actually have signed on to the petition supporting their initiative. So if you have the people who work there, the people who live there are all in agreement of what, you know, they should be getting as, you know, tax-paying citizens. What's the problem? You've gotten your money from the taxpayers, from your abatements. What is the issue?
I think it's true. You pointed 90% of the people with doormen in the city are paying them a living wage, so even without a tax abatement. And so the fact that some people got a tax abatement to make sure they do what everybody else is doing in New York, and not doing it,
Correct.
that's really a problem.
So if you don't remember or you're not clued in to knowing whether or not your building has 421A, how can you find out? Just go to the management company and.
You can go to the management company, or probably go to the.
You can go to DHCR, you can go to HPD to find this out. This is something that's all public record. It's not something that you have to search for.
Right.
But again, they can call my office. We get a multitude of calls on housing issues.
Yeah.
Many of them are from bad actors who are doing the same thing. There's nothing unique as what they're doing.
Right.
It's just that they're all kind of mimicking one another to kind of heighten this cycle of pushing people out and thinking they're putting, quote unquote, the right people in so that they can meet their the needs to to pay off their mortgages, because that's the main issue is that the banks are issuing these mortgages based upon the fact that they're being appraised at market rates, but at the same time they're not realizing that these buildings are rent stabilized for the most part,
So
rent
it's not gonna
subsidized,
go up.
so they don't match. So what you're generating in real time, based upon what you're appraising,
Projections
are
off from-
Yeah.
off. So what do I have to do? I have to get those people out. And what do? I do it at any cost.
Well, thank you for coming here today. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you guys have got some work to do to rewrite
Sure.
this thing for a city that's thriving, not
Yes.
trying to incentivize people to
Yes.
come.
Yeah.
Yes.
We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Thanks
Very
for
much.
having us.
Thank you.